Hi guys, how are you? Welcome to this new video. We just hit 15,000 subscribers on the channel. That is so exciting. Thank you so much for subscribing, for watching these videos, and for being part of this gardening community. If you're new here, hi, I'm Dominika. I'm a professional gardener, and I happen to be gardening in this 17 square meters balcony garden that is in the shade for most of the day. So in today's video, I want to show you what crops I'm going to be starting directly in my container garden at this time of year. So all of these crops that I'm going to be starting today are obviously shade tolerant. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we plant them, but all of these are what we call either short day crops or cool weather crops. So these grow best in the spring or in the fall, when the days are shorter, when the weather is cooler. These are quite cold hardy. They can germinate and grow in temperatures as low as 4 degrees Celsius. They can also handle light frost. That's why I'm sowing them early, because in my climate we don't expect hard frost anymore. The temperature will drop to like 0 degrees Celsius, -1, -2, but nothing lower than that at this time of year. So if in your climate you don't expect any hard frost anymore, you can go ahead and sow these as well. But if you live in a colder climate where perhaps the soil is still frozen in your containers, or you expect hard frost in the next couple of weeks, then wait a little longer. Usually mid to late March is a good moment to sow cool weather crops in most climates. So I'm going to be sowing all of these in my vertical planter. I bought this planter off Amazon last year, and honestly this has been one of the best things that I bought for my container garden, because not only this gives me so much more space to grow plants, it doesn't take up a lot of floor space. And also one other thing is I have this balcony wall, so even if my garden does receive a couple of hours of morning sunlight, even when the sun shines, this balcony wall casts shadow on all the plants that are standing on the floor. So by lifting them off the floor, I allow all of these plants to catch a little bit more light. So this has been such a great addition. Another thing is, as you can see, I already have some soil in these pots. I don't get rid of my old soil. I mentioned this on a couple of occasions that I actually reuse my old soil because I'm trying to build good quality soil in my containers. So for my veggies, what I do, I usually start with a multi-purpose potting mix with added perlite, and then to it I add a whole bunch of good stuff like garden compost, worm castings. I make my own leaf mold. I collect all the leaves that fall in my balcony garden in the fall. I put them all in a plastic bag, and by the same time next year I usually have a beautiful leaf mold to use in my containers. So I'm trying to add a lot of organic matter to build good quality soil, to support soil life, all of those beneficial microorganisms, beneficial bacteria and fungi that help your plant grow, protect your plant, help your plant absorb nutrients. So yeah, that's my goal with all of my planters. But there is some soil missing, especially in those upper planters, so I'm gonna have to refill that. So these upper planters, as you can see, lack a little bit of soil, because inevitably, as you pull out old plants, you remove a little bit of soil with them. So far, I only added a little bit of sphagnum moss. I had sphagnum moss left over from another project, and it was getting, really like dark and ugly. So I thought, well, might as well reuse it in the garden. Sphagnum moss acts like a sponge. It absorbs moisture and helps to retain moisture in the soil. And these planters are quite shallow, so they do dry up pretty quickly in summer. So I added some sphagnum moss, and now I'm just gonna add a couple of handfuls of garden soil. Garden soil is yet another good addition because it helps to retain moisture and nutrients in the soil. So I'm gonna add a couple of handfuls of garden soil and a couple of handfuls of compost, and then we are ready to go. Alright, you guys, it's actually pretty cold and windy today. It was really warm and really sunny. It almost felt like spring this week, and I was super excited, and I said to myself, I'm gonna plant seeds on Friday afternoon. And now Friday afternoon happens to be the coldest and the windiest day. My camera fell like 3 times already, but we are gonna get the seeds planted. One last thing that I wanted to say before we begin is something that it's not a mistake, it's more of a trap that I fell into, and I'm sure many other gardeners fell into at the beginning of their journey, and that is to plant first too many seeds at a time, and to plant too many things that you don't have a lot of experience with, or maybe things that you don't know very well. Because, especially in small gardens, when space is limited, it's really important to optimize the space and to really grow things that you enjoy growing, things that you eat a lot of when it comes to veggies and fruit. So don't maybe buy too many seeds that you don't know. Try to focus on the things that you know your family eats, you know that you enjoy growing, and then maybe offer 1 or 2 containers to something new, some experiment. And speaking of experiments, if you haven't seen my video on Microdwarf tomatoes, I highly encourage you to take a look, because I made a whole video on how to grow Microdwarf tomatoes in the shade. I talk about different varieties, different aspects of growing these tomatoes in the shade. That's my little experiment of the year. I had great luck with them in the past, so I'm repeating that experiment this year, but I'm growing far more varieties than I did in the previous season. So if you haven't seen that, highly encourage you to take a look, because maybe that's something that you will want to introduce into your garden this season. All right, so let's start sowing. We'll start with this first large planter here at the bottom, and I'm gonna be sowing leafy greens. Leafy greens, like all leafy greens, do really well in the shade, even if you don't have any direct sunlight at all. I've grown many different kinds in my garden. A must-have is arugula, and arugula is so satisfying to grow, because from seed to harvest it grows only in about 30 days. So in under a month, or in about a month, you can have fresh arugula leaves to harvest from your garden. I really love the flavor of arugula, and arugula grows, even though it's a cold weather crop, technically it grows really well in summer as well. And here in our climate we have really hot summers, and it does pretty well. So I'm just gonna be sowing it pretty dense, because you know it has very long and narrow leaves, so it doesn't mind being slightly overcrowded. All right, in the second planter I'm gonna be growing spinach. Now spinach is a shade garden classic. It grows really well in the shade without any direct sunlight at all. I think I'm gonna make like a little rows here, like that. Maybe 3-4 rows, about 3. And I'm just gonna sow it thinly, because these are larger than arugula. I'm gonna scatter some soil on top of arugula in just a second, but I'm gonna drop a couple of spinach seeds into my rows. Oops, that went outside. Just gently gonna cover the rows with a little bit of soil. Now I'm gonna scatter some soil on top of these arugula seeds. These are very small, so we do not want to cover them too deep, just, you know, to prevent them from drying and from wind blowing them all over the place. A little bit more. All right, I'm gonna water everything at the end. The second planter here, we have alpine strawberries. Now these stay here, these are perennial. I've had them in my balcony garden for at least 7 years. I am a huge fan of alpine strawberries because, first of all, they do really well in the shade. You can't really grow strawberries in the shade because they do need a little bit of sunlight, at least 5 hours of sunlight, to produce abundantly and for that fruit to actually taste good. Alpine strawberries, they grow even in full shade. They have a really long fruiting period. For me, in my climate, they start to fruit somewhere in April, although as you can see they actually have some flowers and they actually have some alpine strawberries on them. They produce a couple even in the winter, even when it's minus 10 degrees Celsius, for some strange reason. But usually they start producing around April, and then they go all the way until October, and that's when they slow down. They do have a couple of berries throughout winter as well. And unlike traditional strawberry that usually gets exhausted after 3-4 years, you have to replace the mother plant, alpine strawberries can go on for years and years and years. So a huge fan of alpine strawberries. I have 2 yellow ones, 2 red ones. Highly recommend if you need more fruit in your shady garden. So let's move on to the third planter. All right, in this planter we are gonna be sowing radish. Now radish grows exceptionally well in shade, partial shade. I would say you need at least a couple of hours of sunlight, maybe 2-3 hours of sunlight to grow radish. I don't think it can grow in full shade without any sunlight at all, but 2-3 hours of sunlight is largely enough for radish to grow beautifully. I've grown many different kinds in the past and they all did really well. But my two favorites is French breakfast and the one that I discovered last year, which is radish Bacchus. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It grew absolutely enormous. It was purple, not too spicy, quite a nice flavor. So I'm gonna be planting 2 rows of radish. And I used to plant my radish in rows, like I would make a row and then scatter some seeds, but I felt like that was a little bit wasteful because then you have to thin it out, and sometimes I forgot to thin it out. So what I do now is I just poke some holes, individual holes every, I don't know, maybe 6 centimeters or so, and then I plant seeds individually. Alright, so now in this first row I'm gonna plant one kind, the Bacchus that I just spoke about. Hope that's way too much. Goodness. Alright. And I'm gonna drop, maybe I made these holes slightly too deep. Alright. Just gonna drop 1 seed per hole. And radish has a pretty good germination rate. So they should all sprout. Alright, and in the last planter I'm gonna sow some lettuce. I grow a lot of different kinds of lettuce in my garden, but in this planter I usually plant some loose leaf lettuce, some shorter lettuce varieties. So I'm gonna plant a red salad bowl. I had an incredible harvest from this variety last year. I planted it by the end of summer and I harvested all the way until early winter. And even in winter with minus 10 degrees Celsius, I didn't cover it, I didn't protect it at all, and it survived, and it actually started to regrow now in the spring, but I pulled it out because it had some powdery mildew and I wanted to, to sow a fresh crop. So I'm just gonna make some shallow rows and I'm gonna plant it in 2 rows. And red salad bowl is very cold hardy, but it also should grow really well in summer. Many lettuce varieties are like full 4-season varieties. They are not gonna bolt in summer, so we can grow them pretty much year round. Alright, now I'm just gonna water all of the seeds that I just planted. Alright, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. I'm gonna be watering it regularly, and then once the seed starts to sprout and start to grow actively, I'm gonna start fertilizing them with Alga Grow. This is an organic fertilizer rich in nitrogen for the growth phase. It's enriched with algae, so it's really, really great for your plants, for both ornamental and edible plants. And then I have a ton more plants that I'm going to be planting in the garden, some seeds that I started indoors that I'm going to be transferring once the weather warms up. But that being said, if you need some inspiration on what you can grow in your shady garden, check out my shady garden playlist. I have a lot of videos with ideas on both ornamental and edible plants that you can grow in your shady container garden. So that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see each other in the next one. Bye!